Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the Webby-nominated podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. More exciting news, I've recently launched Zibby's Picks book subscription service. 4 times a year, so every 3 months, I'll send you a new fantastic book that I think you will love. So just go to zibbyowens.com, and it's actually zibbyowens.com/swag, and sign up for a book subscription in either fiction, memoir, nonfiction/parenting, children's book, middle grade fiction, and I'll send you just fantastic books, and it will be great. And I also have gift options available if you want to give this to another book lover in your life. So please check it out, tell friends, and start subscribing. Thanks so much to my sponsor, Libro FM. Libro FM Audiobooks lets you purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore. You can pick from more than 125,000 audiobooks, including many New York Times bestsellers and recommendations from booksellers around the country. With Libro FM, you get the same audiobooks at the same price as other audiobook companies, but you're going to be part of a much different story, one that supports the community. You can even choose which local bookstore you'd like to support, which is so cool. Listeners of my podcast can get a 3-month audiobook membership for the price of 1 month. Just go to libro.fm, libro.fm, and enter code ZIBBY, Z-I-B-B-Y. With every time you listen to an audiobook, now you can be proud that you're supporting a local bookstore. And the best part is that I have my own playlist on Libro FM, which is so cool. So the books that have been on my podcast and that I'm recommending are now in my own playlist. If you go to Libro FM/playlists, you can find it, which is so great. I'm excited to be here today with Fiona Davis, the best-selling author of The Dollhouse, The Address, The Masterpiece, and her latest book, The Chelsea Girls. A graduate of the College of William and Mary and the Columbia Journalism School, Fiona worked as an actress in the theater before becoming an editor, freelance journalist, and then a historical fiction novelist. She currently lives in New York City. So welcome to Fiona.
Thank you very much. Thrilled to be here.
Oh, yay. So I was just away with 2 girlfriends, and I had brought a big stack of books with me. I mean, I was gone for 2 days. I brought 6 books, which is like...
Perfect.
One of them, the one on the top, was yours. And my good girlfriend was like, oh my gosh, that book hasn't even come out yet. And I was like, and she had read all your other books and was so excited that I was interviewing him. So my friend Allison. Yeah.
Makes my day. That's wonderful.
So I was like, well, do you want to read mine? She's like, no, I won't finish it. And then, I can't get it on my Kindle for a while. So anyway, you have fans everywhere, as you know. So tell me about The Chelsea Girls, what this book of yours is about and what inspired you to write it.
Sure. So each of my books are situated around a landmark New York City building. And the building for this one is, of course, the Chelsea Hotel. And what it's about is about female friendship and the theater in New York City and politics, which is kind of something new that I'm layering in. And it takes place in 1950 from the point of view of an actress and a playwright, both women, who were trying to mount a play on Broadway during the McCarthy-era. And that was a very interesting time for actors in New York City. And I did a lot of research and learned all about it. And The Chelsea Girls has everything that my other books are known for, which is a couple timelines. It's set in an iconic New York City building. And there's a couple major twists.
For sure. I did not see one of those coming in particular.
Oh, good. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, I really didn't. And I was trying to figure it out, but I did not. So why the Chelsea Hotel? And have you been there? When was the first time you went there? How did you pick it as your next book site?
Yeah, sure. So I'd been to the Chelsea Hotel a long time ago, and I remember popping into the lobby and being kind of intimidated by it. There's a lot of artwork. There's some quirky people. It's just got this kind of wild history of being a place where artists and painters and musicians and actors and playwrights all lived. And it has a reputation for being very eccentric and kind of quirky. It was founded in the 1880s as a co-op, but went bankrupt and then became a hotel. And some of the people who've lived there, it's an incredible list. Dylan Thomas, Janis Joplin, Leonard Cohen. There's just an incredible list of people through the ages who've lived there. And so, in fact, it was kind of intimidating at the thought of choosing it. But the more I researched, the more I realized it was really the perfect setting for this book, because it was a hotbed of political intrigue in the 50s. And so it kind of made the perfect setting for people dealing with McCarthyism.
And did you know anybody, like when you were doing your research, did you talk to anybody who was affected by sort of the blacklisting and the magazines that came out listing people's names? Like, do you have firsthand experience with that, or was this more research that was in newspapers and things like that?
It's such a good question. The whole idea for kind of focusing on that era came from an interview I did with an actress who was 99 the last time I talked to her. She passed away last year at the age of 99. And her name was Virginia Robinson. And I had interviewed her because I thought maybe in one of the earlier books I might have an actress. And I ended up not doing it for that book because I knew I had to save it because this was gold. We were talking about her time in the USO on tour in World War II. And her level of detail was incredible. She talked about how, her soldier boyfriend would bring her good and plenty, or how they craved orange juice. And then she started talking about being an actress in New York in the 1950s. And she started using phrases like red channels and loyalty oaths. And she became incensed when I didn't know what she was talking about. And I realized there was this whole level of the McCarthy era that I didn't know that affected New York City actors that was really more of kind of a gray list than a blacklist, which is what we know of from the film industry and Trumbo. And so from talking to her, and I went back to her a few times to keep on interviewing her. And again, she just had such vivid memories, and her anger was just as strong today as it was back then at the injustice that was being done towards artists and entertainers. And I went on to interview two other people who were directly affected then.
And just to jump in for a second, in case people, like I was not familiar with this either. So basically what was going on at the time was that people in the theater and other industries were being unfairly picked out as communists for doing things like attending one single march or signing one piece of paper or something, and then blasted publicly for their affiliation with communism, and then sometimes losing their jobs and things like that. Is that a good?
Yeah, exactly. That perfectly sums it up. There's a publication called Red Channels that if you got named in that, and it would list your name and then all your supposed offenses, no one would hire you. And it was completely unjust because it was completely, a terrible thing to do, because keep in mind, even being a communist was perfectly legal back then. It wasn't illegal. And a lot of these people were just picked out because, for example, Lee Grant was an actress I interviewed, and she was nominated for an Oscar for her first film role in 1951, but then she refused to testify against her husband before the House Un-American Activities Committee and did not work for 10 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would have liked to be like, a fly on the wall in their household for those 10 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, right? I mean, that's tough. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah. It was just very arbitrary and really unfair.
Mm-hmm. And then, so the context of the political intrigue made this particularly interesting, but also, even without that, the female friendship relationships and the siblings and the mothers and daughters. I mean, this is like a book. I mean, it could have been today with some other political issue going on. And I loved how you talked about Maxine and Hazel's relationships, the two women, the famous actress and the playwright. And in one scene, you have Hazel telling Maxine, I didn't write back. I pulled away from our friendship, and I'm so sorry. I felt dull next to your glamorous lifestyle, like I was treading water while you performed tricks from the high dive. I was jealous, I suppose. So talk to me more about this aspect of women's friendship, theirs in particular, but what made you want to dive into that relationship dynamic?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you're in the theater industry or I came to New York as an actress in my 20s. And so you go to auditions and there's just I was a tall blonde, and I'd go to auditions and there'd be a line of 20 tall blondes, all going for the same part or the same commercial. And it was just insane. But luckily I fell into a theater company called Willow Cabin, and we put on 3 shows a year, and we did everything. We hung the lights, we made the costumes, we went to thrift stores and bought things if we couldn't, make them. And it was just this fantastic group of people, and the exact opposite of that, where everybody was pulling together and it was all to put on a show. And, one of our shows went to Broadway and was nominated for a Tony. And it was just they're all still my best friends today.
Oh, no way.
And
That's
so,
so
oh
nice.
yeah, yeah. So it's really the opposite of that. But you could see as you go out for auditions, just the nature of the beast is that it's, you're competing with people. And so I was interested in kind of looking into that. And these two women who both started out as actresses, but one becomes a playwright. And how does that power dynamic change?
I feel like people don't often, especially women, there is this sort of comparison that goes on a lot between women with each other, sort of a measuring up that's constantly taken, whether it's your body or your clothes or your life, that people, they don't feel good about it. And some women obviously do this much more than others, and which I think comes mostly from insecurity and whatever else. But, it's often not addressed in the way that you did so beautifully here. And that, even that Hazel would have the self-awareness to know, like, you know what, or Maxine would have the self-awareness. They both have enough self-awareness to sort of take stock of their relationship and be able to apologize for it, right?
Yes, yeah. And to go with the flow as circumstances change, and realizing that a friendship is fluid. And so there are sometimes that, one person is kind of pulling their weight more than the other. It's almost like a marriage, I think, a long-term friendship where you go through cycles and you're really connected, and then things come up and you're off doing other things. But having that history of these experiences is what really bonded them.
Do you think that men do the same thing? I mean, I feel like men, this is just my 2 cents. I don't know. From what the people that I've come into contact with, men are more likely to be like, oh, that guy has that great job and I want that. And whereas women won't say that at all. They'll just be like, I don't think she needs to come to lunch.
Oh, I do think men have a different bond that I think in some ways can be even deeper than a woman's, without all the talking and the angst. I think some men just have bonds that have guided them through all their lives. And there's less of the kind of up and down that sometimes women do. Maybe it's our natures. I'm not sure.
You wrote so poignantly about Hazel losing her brother Ben in the war. And I was just wondering, and you don't have to answer this, but if you've gone through any personal losses yourself, which have made you more sensitive to sort of that feeling of loss and grief.
I've been so lucky in that my family is still around and I'm close with my brother and my parents are still around. I'm very happy. But for me, I probably draw on a period from about 5 years ago when I went through a divorce. And that same year, my dog died.
Aww.
And there was just a lot of loss within a short period of time, this kind of cascade of loss. And I really had to figure out what I wanted to do with my life and what I wanted out of life after taking care of other people for a long time. Now what? And so for me, I think that's what I tap into, that sense of kind of coming home at the end of the day to an empty apartment and not even the dog being able to come and greet me.
Oh, that's such a sad visual. That's just so sad.
And so it even though it wasn't a loss that, everybody was still around, and it was a change in family dynamics. And that was what, in a way, it kind of woke me up in a really wonderful way. So, I think for Hazel, losing her brother puts her in the spotlight, where they're this family that is all about being entertainers, and he was supposed to be the Prince of Broadway. And so now she is supposed to take up that mantle, and how does she do that?
And you brought in their relationship with the mother, because the mother, of course, had idolized the son, has been more pushing Hazel to take his place in a way. And you had a great quote. Maxine is now commenting on Hazel's relationship with her mother, and you say, "Your mother is one of those people who comes across as selfless and caring, but only so others will recognize and laud her martyrdom. She craves control." So tell me more about that.
Yeah, I love how you picked out these lines that are so key. You're honing in exactly where you should. Yeah, for me, I think I am a caretaker, and so I like to take care of everybody. And as I've gotten older, I've realized, that's not my issue. I can't take care of everybody. I can't control everything. So I was interested in exploring that in the book. And so, how do you live in the moment, and how do you enjoy what you have, knowing that you don't know what's going to happen down the road? And so for me, I think that's where that comes in. And also, I think I've been able to channel that need to control into writing books where you do control the plot and you do control all the characters and you decide if they're happy or sad or if they live or die. And, it's very empowering to write a book because you're living in this whole other world that's all yours to play with. And so, yeah, in the book, I like making the mother, she's not very sympathetic, but but just exploring the things that I'm interested in through these characters is what I try to do.
That's so interesting to say that writing is a way of exerting control in a world that feels out of control. I mean, it seems obvious, but I haven't heard it said like that before. And it's so true, right? If you really want to affect change, just make it up, really, right?
Yes, exactly.
Have you ever tried writing a play? I feel like you had you just described Hazel's writing this play, her plays. And I mean, obviously writing a book has some of the similar things of, sitting down and the typewriter and the hotel and all the rest of it. But I was just wondering if you had tried to write a play, or if you want to write the play, The Wartime Sonata, which she writes. Like, do you want to now go and try to write that?
I love that. I see a lot of plays, and so I have such respect for great playwrights and how they do what they do. And I think having watched a lot of plays, I can see how you build tension and how dialogue is so important. But I don't know if I could write one because I'd miss writing about all the behind the scenes stuff of what the room looks like and being able to show the character's interior through the exterior in a way, which you can't do. A play is just stripped down. Mm-hmm. And so, no, that intimidates me like crazy, the thought of doing that. And it was so much fun to write about a play in the book without having to write the play because it could be whatever I want, I could kind of layer in whatever I wanted. And I think it's kind of a parallel situation to when you first start writing a book and it's this great idea, right? And it's going to be amazing and it could go anywhere. And then as you start writing it, you have to get specific and suddenly it gets harder and harder. And so to have this kind of bubble of Wartime Sonata of this amazing play, which I didn't have to write, that was.
So what is it like when you write books? What's your process like? And how long does it take for each of your books? And where do you like to write?
Yeah, so I am a plotter. I come from a family of engineers and, you figure it all out beforehand. And so that's what I do. I do a lot of research for about 3 months to figure out who the characters should be and really get to know the setting, which is so important and almost like another character in the book. And then I write a first draft and then I revise it, I'd say anywhere from 9 to 11 times of going through and showing it to my agent and to my editor and really deepening it. But I tend to know where I need to go. And because it's complicated and there's 2 timelines and an element of mystery, I really have to know where I'm headed in order to pull that off and not waste time. I write about a book a year at the moment.
Wow, that's impressive.
It's crazy.
What's the hardest part of that for you? Like, what moment is the hardest?
I think the hardest is after you've written the first draft and it feels like, oh yeah, I figured this out. And then you get feedback and you realize, no, you've got a long way to go. And having been a former journalist, I really love a good editor. I love getting feedback. I love having that input of realizing, oh yeah, what if I did this? But it's a lot of work. And every book, it's still a lot of work.
Do you already have your next site picked out for your next book? Or have you started writing your next book already? Or is it done?
Yeah,
is it done?
No. The first draft is done. It's set at the New York Public Library.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And I learned that in my research, when it first opened in 1911, for about 20 years, the superintendent lived in the building in a 7-room apartment in the public library with his family, with his wife and 3 kids. And so I've created a superintendent who's a fictional one, and it's from the point of view of the superintendent's wife, who in 1913, and she kind of gets caught up in, she wants to go to journalism school, which the Columbia Journalism School had just opened at that moment. And she gets kind of caught up in the new bohemia of Greenwich Village and the changes that were kind of happening among women at that time that were really dynamic and kind of out there. And then it also takes place from the point of view of this risk-averse librarian in 1993 who's trying to put on an exhibit of rare books. And both timelines deal with book thefts and these rare books and manuscripts that are going missing. And so you're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on? Where are these thefts happening? How are they happening? And these two men who are really striving to make their mark.
That sounds so good. Do you have a working title for it?
Yep, it's called The Lions of Fifth Avenue.
Oh, that's great. I'm on the library council there. So I always try to, I started getting involved right after college. I was a young lion, and now I'm on the library council. And every year I chair, I've been chairing the library lunch for the last 4 years or so, which I love doing. And they always have these fantastic panelists with David Remnick of the New Yorker. And so I'm a huge fan. My first wedding was at the New York Public Library. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I had no idea.
2005. Yeah. So I'm a
and
big...
you're actually called the Lions. You're actually called the Lions.
The Young Lions when I was young. Then I was kicked out because I'm too old. So now they moved me onto the Library Council, which is just like another committee. And anyway, I'm a huge fan of libraries, and particularly the New York Public Library. So I'm excited that your next book is that. That's awesome.
Fantastic. They've been wonderful. They've given me a behind the scenes tour. I've been able to see where the old apartment was. I even there's something called the Allen Room, where if you have a book contract, you can go in there and work, and they deliver books right to you. So I have books on typhoid and all that. It's just a remarkable place, and they've been wonderful.
Oh, that's great. I have one more question about the theater aspect, and then I just want to hear any general advice you have. But I feel like there have been a series of threats to the theater community over the years. The McCarthyism, I feel like the AIDS crisis in the 80s was just a huge, obviously huge threat. What do you think now is the biggest threat to the theater world?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think one of the issues is that there's so many big spectaculars going on. And so they're all of films and things that we already know. So it's just recycling material for the biggest bang for your buck to lure in tourists. So there's not much behind them. They're kind of thin. On the other hand, though, it really is almost like a golden age of theater going on right now, where it's really hard to get space if you're trying to mount a show, because there's so many options. There's so many plays and musicals going on. And you have some amazing young playwrights like Lucas Knott and Martina Mayock, and who are doing these incredible plays, and they're young and smart. You have Manhattan Theater Club and Playwrights Horizons. And so there's all this stuff percolating, and it's new voices who they have something to say, and they're not coming from the old traditional theater, which was, older white guys talking about whatever. These are young, smart, diverse playwrights who are saying something new. And to me, that's just really exciting.
That is exciting. I feel like, just to answer my own question, I feel like the biggest threat is people's lack of attention and the distractions from sort of technology and phones. And I loved the introduction to the Tonys this year. Did you watch the Tonys?
Yes,
that hilarious little, song and dance number at the beginning. So funny. So I feel like at least they're aware, and trying to tackle that particular challenge right now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it's certainly not for a lack of fabulous content in the theater world. That's for sure. So what advice can you give to aspiring authors who want to be the next you?
I would say write what you want to read, which I know people say all the time. But when I started writing The Dollhouse, my first book, I knew I wanted to do it in 2 timelines because those are the books I love. And I knew I wanted some mystery and some clues because that's what I love. If I'd known how hard that was, I would have never attempted it. But I'm so glad I did. And it was a real learning curve. And I learned a lot from doing that. And I think the other thing is it's okay to live your life first before you become a writer. I'm in my 50s. I'm not in my 20s. And I'm so glad that the success is coming now because A, I can appreciate it. And B, I feel like I have something to say. If I were in my 20s, I just wouldn't have the life experience to tap into. And so I encourage anyone who's thinking about being a writer, don't worry if you haven't been doing it since you were 18. It's okay to start late.
I literally just interviewed Joanne Ramos, who wrote The Farm, a novel that came out this summer.
Oh, yes, I have that. It's on my TBR
it's really
list.
good.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. Anyway, I literally interviewed her about an hour ago, and we had the same conversation at the end because I was saying that everyone I'm interviewing, I'm not interviewing that many people in their 20s or even really early 30s, right? Like, I feel like there must be something about this stage of life where great content comes from, or the wisdom or whatever. Anyway, we were literally just having the same thing. And so your advice that's the advice of the day.
That's so good. I'm glad I'm tapping into the theme. That's excellent.
The theme of my morning this summer day.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. I feel like I need to have an event now with you, and maybe you've already done this, and Julie Satow, who wrote The Plaza, and then you could have like the Chelsea Hotel and the Plaza sort of dynamic of the conversation.
I love that. Yeah. And how fantastic. That book is just incredible. And the research she did is, I mean, I've had so many people say to me, hey, have you heard of this book? Because you should write about the widows.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, maybe I'll get you guys, maybe we'll get that in the works as well.
Sounds great. Well, thank you. And thank you for everything you do to connect readers and authors. It means so much. And it's just so much fun to watch your success. You've been exploding, which is fantastic.
Thank you. That's so nice of you to say. Well, thanks for coming on. This was so fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks again to my sponsor, Libro FM Audiobooks. Thanks for listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. You can follow me on Instagram at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books and at Zibby Owens, and my new podcast at Kids Do Have Time to Read. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music. Thanks for listening. You can always email me at zibby@zibbyowens.com.